Story 1, I-77, West Virginia. I've been driving long haul long enough to know the difference between imagination and instinct. Imagination comes from fatigue. Instinct comes from something deeper, something that tells you when a situation isn't just unusual, but wrong. What happened to me on I-77 in West Virginia wasn't fatigue. I was rested, caffeinated, clear-headed, and I still replay that night in my mind more than I'd like to admit. It was 2:17 in the morning, heading south through the Appalachian Mountains. That stretch of interstate is isolated in a way that's hard to describe unless you've driven it. No town lights bleeding into the horizon. No farmhouses in the distance. Just miles of elevation changes and dense forest pressing up against the guardrails, the kind of darkness that feels layered. I was hauling paper products to Charlotte in a 2019 Freightliner Cascadia. Light load. Smooth ride. Cruise set just under 70 mph. Outside temperature hovering around 41 degrees. A thick fog had settled into the valleys, and the higher elevations were worse. My headlights weren't projecting forward so much as illuminating a wall of white mist that swallowed everything beyond a short distance. The radio changed first. 1 second it was low country music, the next it shifted into static. That's normal in the mountains. Signals bounce. But this wasn't popping or cutting out. The static smoothed out, became steady, almost uniform. Then it began to pulse. At first, I thought it was interference from power lines or atmospheric conditions, but the rhythm was too consistent. Inhale, pause, exhale, slow breathing. It didn't sound far away. It sounded inside the cab, close enough that I instinctively turned my head toward the passenger seat before realizing the sound was coming through the left speaker. I shut the radio off immediately. The silence afterward didn't feel like relief. It felt heavy, like the absence of noise made the darkness outside more aware of me. A few minutes passed. I kept my eyes scanning the road and mirrors like always. That's when I noticed movement in the passenger side mirror. At first, it barely registered. Just something darker moving against the tree line. Deer are common in that area, and they'll sometimes run parallel to the road before crossing. But this didn't cross. It stayed even with my trailer. I checked my speed, 70 mph. The movement remained steady. I leaned forward slightly, adjusting the angle of the mirror to cut through glare and fog. The shape wasn't low like an animal, it was upright, tall, extremely thin, moving between the trees, keeping exact pace with my truck. The terrain there isn't flat. It's uneven, covered in brush, roots, rocks, and incline. Nothing should be able to move that fast through it without stumbling. I pressed the accelerator lightly, more to test what I was seeing than to escape. The engine climbed smoothly to 73, then 75 mph. The shape didn't lag. It didn't fall behind. It adjusted effortlessly. As the fog shifted slightly with elevation, the outline became clearer for just a moment. Its arms were longer than they should have been, swinging in wide arcs. The posture leaned forward slightly, but not like something struggling, more like something built for sustained speed. Then it did something that made the hair on my arms stand up. Its head turned. Not the body, just the head. It angled toward the highway. Toward me. Even through the fog, I could sense orientation. Awareness. It wasn't randomly running. It knew I was there. I couldn't make out facial features, but I saw contrast where eyes would be, darker shapes fixed in my direction. For several seconds we moved together like that, my truck at 75 mph on pavement, that thing matching me through forest terrain. There was no heavy breathing visible in the cold air, no crashing through brush, no sound beyond my engine. Then, without changing speed, it angled left into denser trees and vanished. Not slowed, not stumbled, just absorbed into darkness. I kept driving because stopping didn't make sense. Pulling over in that fog at that hour would have been stupid. But my grip on the steering wheel felt locked. I was hyper-aware of every sound in the cab. About 12 miles later, Near a rest area outside Mineral Wells, I pulled in under bright overhead lights. The sudden visibility felt almost unnatural after that stretch of darkness. I stepped out, telling myself I just needed air. When I walked along the passenger side of the trailer, I saw 3 long streaks through the layer of road grime. They weren't deep gouges in the metal, but they were clean drag marks, spaced unevenly, running forward along the trailer wall for nearly 20 feet. They started near the rear axle and continued toward the midpoint. They were fresh. There hadn't been anything near my truck earlier that night that could have made those. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at them under fluorescent lighting, trying to rationalize how branches at highway speed might create that pattern. But the spacing didn't match brush, the height didn't match guardrails, and nothing on that stretch runs parallel to your trailer for that long. I finished the delivery the next morning. I didn't tell dispatch. I didn't tell other drivers at the dock. It sounds insane when you say it out loud. But I stopped taking I-77 through that section between midnight and 4 a.m. whenever I have a choice. Not because I think something is hunting drivers, but because whatever ran beside me didn't look confused or feral. It looked deliberate, and I can't shake the feeling that it wasn't testing how fast I could go. It was testing whether I would stop.
Story 2, Blue Ridge Parkway. I've driven through mountains most of my adult life, and I've learned that fear on the road usually has a source you can name. Ice, fatigue, mechanical failure, animals. But what happened to me on the Blue Ridge Parkway wasn't something I can label, and that's what makes it worse now, years later, because if you can't name something, you can't convince yourself it was normal. I wasn't even supposed to be on that road. Construction had rerouted my usual interstate path, and dispatch sent me through a stretch cutting along Pisgah National Forest. It was around 1:40 in the morning when I began the climb. The kind of hour where your thoughts get louder because there's nothing else around to compete with them. No traffic, no town lights bleeding into the horizon. Just layers of black forest pressing in on both sides of the pavement. The fog up there doesn't drift like valley fog. It spills downward through the trees, slow and deliberate, like something pouring over the mountain. My headlights carved narrow tunnels into it, but beyond that beam the world didn't exist. The dashboard lights cast a dull red glow inside the cab, and the engine's low vibration hummed up through the steering column into my palms. Normally that vibration feels grounding. That night it felt like the only proof I was still connected to something mechanical and predictable. About 20 minutes into the climb, my GPS stopped updating. The vehicle icon froze mid-curve. The clock on the screen locked at 1:57 a.m. I tapped it, thinking it lagged. Nothing changed. Meanwhile, the truck kept moving, tires rolling steadily over asphalt I could barely see through the fog. At the same moment, the outside temperature reading on my dash dropped from 38 degrees to 21 in under 10 seconds. I actually muttered out loud, "That's not possible." Because temperature doesn't plunge like that without warning. My breath inside the cab suddenly felt colder against my lips, as if the glass around me had thinned. Then I saw it. At first, it was just vertical distortion between 2 trees on the right shoulder, something darker than the surrounding darkness. My brain tried to turn it into a branch, a signpost, anything harmless. But it shifted. It stepped forward slowly, deliberately, as if it had been waiting for my headlights to reach a certain distance. It was tall in a way that felt structurally wrong. Not just tall, elongated. The limbs seemed slightly too long for the torso, the joints bending with a fluidity that didn't match human movement. It didn't rush the road. It didn't flinch at the sound of a diesel engine approaching. It simply stood there watching the truck climb toward it. My hands tightened around the steering wheel, and I realized they were slick with sweat. I told myself it had to be a trick of fog and light refraction. That mountains play with depth perception. But as I eased closer, the headlights didn't clarify its features. Instead, the light seemed to blur against it, like it wasn't reflecting properly. The edges of its shape softened unnaturally, as if the air around it was distorting. When I was maybe 30 feet away, it bent forward at the spine, not at the knees. The upper half of its body lowered slowly until its head hung closer to the asphalt, arms dangling almost to the ground. It wasn't crouching like an animal preparing to pounce. It was adjusting its height, as if testing how small it could make itself. My breathing grew shallow. I remember thinking very clearly, "Do not stop. Whatever you do, do not stop." It stepped onto the shoulder. Close enough now that I could see the surface of its skin, dark, matte, almost like damp bark after rain. The lower half of its face stretched sideways in what I can only describe as a smile, though the proportions were wrong, too wide, too deliberate. I pressed the accelerator. The engine growled under strain as the truck climbed harder. In the side mirror, I saw movement upward instead of forward. It climbed the nearest tree with terrifying speed, limbs wrapping around the trunk in seconds, no slipping, no hesitation. It reached a branch extending over the roadway and balanced along it as if gravity was optional. That's when the scraping started. A faint, irregular sound above the cab, like wood under shifting pressure. Small debris fell onto the asphalt behind me. I kept my eyes forward, but my peripheral vision kept dragging upward toward the canopy. Then something landed on the trailer roof. Not a heavy crash. A controlled, distributed impact. The entire rig shuddered subtly, and I felt the change through the steering column. The weight settled evenly, not chaotic, as if whatever it was understood balance. The sound moved slowly across the metal above me, a dragging, careful repositioning. The truck leaned into a curve, and I intentionally took it faster than I should have, hoping physics might do something I couldn't. The tires gripped hard. The cab tilted. For a moment, the dragging noise shifted toward the rear. Then it stopped. No fall, no thud, just absence. I drove another 15 miles before pulling into a closed ranger station lot, illuminated by a single floodlight. My legs felt unsteady when I stepped down from the cab. I climbed onto the catwalk with a flashlight and aimed it across the trailer roof. 4 elongated indentations pressed inward into the metal panels. Not scratches, not claw marks. Depressions shaped like something had crouched there, distributing weight carefully across multiple points. The metal felt colder than the surrounding air when I touched it. Not just night cold, unnaturally cold. When I got back inside, the GPS screen flickered and suddenly updated. The time jumped from 1:57 a.m. to 2:34 a.m., 37 minutes gone. My phone showed the same gap. No signal logs, no location data. I finished the delivery the next morning, but I didn't sleep for 2 days after. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured it balancing above the roadway, studying the cab from the treetops. 3 days later, while washing the truck at a depot in Tennessee, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. At the top edge of the windshield, barely visible unless the light hit it at the right angle, were faint streaks curving downward across the glass. Not from wipers, not from rain. They were positioned too high, almost at the roofline. Like something had leaned down from above and placed his hands there. I didn't tell anyone, I didn't file a report, what would I say? But here's the part that keeps me awake. Sometimes, driving at night through heavily wooded stretches, my eyes drift upward without me realizing it. Not to the road, not to the mirrors, to the canopy, because I don't think it was trying to stop me. I think it was measuring the truck, learning its shape, and sometimes I wonder if that night wasn't the only time something rode above me. Just the only time I noticed.
Story 3, The Road Watcher. I thought I understood what fear felt like on the road. Ice on blacktop, brake failure on a downhill grade, a blown tire at 70 miles an hour. Those are clean fears. They have causes. They make sense. What happened to me crossing through Allegheny National Forest on US Route 6 didn't make sense, and that's what still unsettles me. It didn't feel like an accident waiting to happen. It felt like something waiting for me. It was late November, the kind of cold that doesn't stab at first, but slowly seeps through the cab until your fingers stiffen around the wheel. I was hauling steel coils strapped down with thick chains, each one tension tight across the load. Every time I took a curve, the metal gave off a low, strained groan, a heavy sound that vibrated through the trailer and into the frame of the truck. After enough years, those sounds become background noise. That night, they felt sharper, like the truck was more aware of its own weight. Around 2:11 in the morning, the radio signal disappeared. Not static, not fading in and out. It was as if someone had reached into the air and removed sound entirely. Even the faint hiss between stations was gone. The silence pressed against my ears until the diesel engine seemed too loud, too isolated in the dark. A few minutes later, I noticed a smell. At first, I thought it was the heater pulling something from the engine compartment. But this wasn't oil or hot rubber. It was damp soil, rotting wood. The smell of freshly turned earth after heavy rain. It grew stronger by the second, thick and organic, coating the inside of my mouth with a metallic aftertaste. I checked the passenger seat. Empty, windows sealed, vents unchanged, but the smell didn't fade. That stretch of Route 6 cuts deep through the forest. No shoulder in places, just asphalt pressed between walls of tall, skeletal trees. The headlights don't illuminate the woods so much as carve a narrow corridor through them. Everything outside that beam is absolute black. Then I saw the lights ahead. Two faint red points hovering low in the distance. My first thought was brake lights from a stopped vehicle, maybe someone broken down in the road. I eased off the accelerator, letting the engine brake slow me gradually. 55, 45, 35. The red lights didn't flicker like hazard lights. They didn't reflect like taillights. They didn't cast any glow onto the pavement. They simply existed. As I drew closer, I realized they were positioned too low and too far apart to belong to any vehicle I'd ever seen. They were centered in my lane. At 20 miles per hour, I understood what I was looking at. They weren't lights. They were eyes. My chest tightened so fast it felt like the air had been punched out of me. The truck rolled forward, heavy and slow. The steel chains behind me gave a soft metallic shift as the load settled under braking. The eyes blinked. Not shut. Just dimmed and brightened like something adjusting focus. The shape around them began to rise. I didn't see it stand up the way a person would. It unfolded, lengthening vertically until it towered in the beam of my headlights. The outline was wrong in ways my brain struggled to categorize. Shoulders too narrow, arms hanging too low, limbs elongated as if stretched. Its surface didn't reflect light properly. The edges seemed blurred, almost distorted, like heat shimmer rising off asphalt in summer. I should have reversed. I should have turned around. Instead, I froze. The smell inside the cab intensified until it felt like the forest floor itself had been packed around me. My tongue tasted copper. My hands trembled against the steering wheel. The thing stepped forward. The sound it made wasn't leaves crunching. It was wet. A thick, dragging shift. Like something heavy pulling itself across damp ground. Instinct snapped me loose. I slammed the accelerator to the floor. The diesel engine roared, the entire cab vibrating as torque pushed the load forward. I didn't swerve. I didn't hesitate. I drove straight toward it. In the final seconds before impact, the eyes vanished. Not darted away. Not blinked out. Gone. The truck passed through the space where it had been standing. I felt no impact, no resistance. Nothing under the tires. But the smell flooded the cab so strongly that my eyes watered. I checked the mirrors. At first, I saw nothing but darkness and the faint reflection of my own trailer lights. Then the shape resolved itself on top of the steel coils. It was crouched between them, balanced effortlessly on curved metal surfaces that should have been impossible to stand on. The red eyes were fixed forward, looking not at the road but at me through the mirror. My stomach dropped so violently I thought I might black out. I accelerated harder than I ever had on that road. The truck shook. The chains began vibrating violently as the load shifted under the strain. Metal clanged against metal, a chaotic rhythm that drowned out everything else. A loud crack split through the noise. One of the chains snapped. The trailer lurched, weight redistributing dangerously. I fought the steering wheel to keep the truck straight. In the mirror, the figure rose to full height atop the coils. It didn't wobble. It didn't brace. It stood as if gravity was optional. Then it tilted its head slightly to one side. Not aggressive, not threatening, curious, as if studying me. I don't know how long I drove like that. The forest felt endless, the road stretching into darkness that refused to thin. My entire body was shaking, teeth chattering despite the heater running hot. Then, without warning, the red eyes went dark. The shape was gone. The chain stopped thrashing. The smell began to fade, slowly, like smoke dissipating after a fire. I didn't slow down until I reached a lit gas station miles beyond the forest boundary. I parked under bright canopy lights and stumbled out of the cab on legs that barely held me. 3 chains had snapped. The steel coils bore deep pressure marks along their curved surfaces, indentations shaped like elongated fingers pressed hard into solid metal. I told my supervisor the load had shifted during a curve. I took the reprimand without argument. A week later, parked at home, I climbed up to clean the windshield. That's when I noticed the marks on the roof of the cab above the glass. 4 long gouges in the paint, evenly spaced, as if something had gripped the top edge tightly. When I leaned closer, I smelled it again. Faint, damp soil, rotting wood. Since that night, sometimes I wake up with the sensation of weight pressing down on the roof of my house. No scratching. No movement. Just pressure. As if something is crouched there, balanced carefully, waiting. And every once in a while, when I catch my reflection in a dark window, I see 2 dim red points behind me for just a fraction of a second before they disappear. I don't drive Route 6 anymore, but I don't think that matters. because I don't think it was guarding the forest. I think it was choosing something to follow, and I'm not sure it ever got off my truck.